Vivian Silver dedicated her life to peace, but did not live to see it happen. I still can't accept it, says her son Hen Zygan. The fact my mother will have grandchildren she will never meet. For more than a month, Silver's family believed she was taken hostage and still alive. Her heartbroken brother spoke at her funeral.
I will miss hearing her voice.
Neil Silver says his sister was always an idealist, even as a girl growing up in Winnipeg.
Just looking around today, you see the types of people that became religious, secular, Bedouin. She touched so many lives.
And I'm Vivian.
She founded the group Women Wage Peace, promoting partnerships between Jews and Arabs. Silver would often drive sick Palestinians from Gaza to hospitals in Israel.
She was so involved in trying to help, and it's just so unfair.
Gadir Hani is a member of Women Wage Peace and an Arab Israeli. She was one of the last people Silver spoke to.
She believed in peace and working together.
Silver's brother says most of the people on Kibbutz Be'eri, where Silver lived, were left-leaning. But some of the survivors now question whether there will ever be an end to the violence.
Vivian wouldn't have been, her views would not have changed. She would have been even more steadfast, believing that there are people on the other side who really do want the same thing that the people on this side want.
Family and friends say Silver would tell those in doubt, there is no way to peace. Peace is the way. Taria Isri, Global News.
Welcome once again to the Radical Imagination. I'm your host, Jim Vredos. The Doomsday Clock, a symbol that represents the likelihood of a human-made global catastrophe, is now at 90 seconds. That's the nearest it's been to midnight since the clock was first set up in 1947. What we're seeing around the world is humankind's age-old resort to violence and war to solve human conflicts and political struggles. It's taken a particularly barbaric turn in the Middle East, where once again, Israelis and Palestinians are involved in the latest of their many wars and violent confrontations. Those confrontations and wars have only resulted in continual cycles of escalating violence and little peace between the two peoples. But even in the midst of the heightened anger and rage on both sides, in the barbarity of the moment, there are still members of both populations who are capable and willing to engage in dialogues across boundaries that represents the peace parties within each civilization. One of those individuals was Vivian Silver, a Canadian-Israeli peace activist who was declared dead this week following the October 7th Hamas attacks. She spent her life pursuing peace in the region and co-founded Women Wage Peace, which lobbies for a diplomatic resolution to the conflict and brings together women from both Israeli and Palestinian societies. Through the Road to Recovery organization, she provided transportation for sick Palestinians from Gaza to Israel for medical treatment. She was and still is an enormous inspiration among the great numbers of Palestinians and Israelis and the millions around the world who still struggle to bring about peace. As she put it, there is no way to peace. Peace is the way. The best the rest of us can do is to encourage these saner voices to pursue and build structures and relationships that allow for the healing and redemption, restoration of honor and respect to two very, very hurt and traumatized peoples. Our guest today on the Radical Imagination is an example of someone who brings his scholarship, passion, and humanity towards making the world a more peaceful place. Avi Shilon is a renowned Israeli historian and political scientist who has taught with the Institute for Israel and Jewish Studies at Columbia University and the Taub Center for Israel Studies at NYU. His critically acclaimed works include Menachem Begin, A Life, Ben-Gurion, His Later Years in the Political Wilderness, and The Decline of the Left Wing in Israel, Yosef Berlin, and the Politics of the Peace Process. Avi also contributes to op-ed pieces in Haaretz magazine, as well as Middle Eastern Studies, the Jewish Quarterly Review, and Middle East Journal. He's one of those saner individuals who encourages both sides to step back from the abyss. So Avi, thank you very, very much for being here. I really appreciate you doing this. You're calling in, zooming in from Tel Aviv. And again, thank you so very much for being here. It's really an honor and a pleasure to see you again.
Thanks for having me, Jim, and thanks for your nice introduction of myself. And I'm ready to start discussing with you. It's always a pleasure.
Well, we have a lot to cover, and I just, beginning here, how are things you're in Tel Aviv now, right? I mean, is there relative quiet? How are things where you are?
Yeah. So it's you need to put it in a comparison, because in comparison to those miserable Israelis who have been murdered in the south, the situation in Tel Aviv is much better. Since the beginning of the war, we are going to the shelter, let's say 1 or twice a day. Today there was no siren, but we are protected by the Iron Dome, and we are taking a security measure like going to the shelter. It's hard because there was no school in Israel up until the last week, so it was like going back to the COVID era. And obviously you need to protect your kids from what's going on. So, for example, my kids don't know about they didn't know about the kidnapping, only about the hostages, only about the missiles, but they discovered it by themselves. So there is a lot of psychological burden which involved in the daily life in Israel right now. And I hope tomorrow, there should be a ceasefire in exchange for releasing some of the hostages. So we are all very hoping to see some of them back in Israel.
Yeah, let's get into that as well too. How old are your kids? Out of curiosity.
5.5, Ro'i, and 10 years old, Itamar.
Yeah.
So
okay, well, I as I was saying, there's so many different hats I'd like you to play today on the show. We as you know, we tried to have Rashid Khalidi on. His schedule is just jammed up. Norm Finkelstein, representatives from Jewish Voice of Peace, the group that's banned in at Columbia University, and my own student, Yishai Fleischer, who couldn't make it as well. He's on a plane flying back to Israel, who is a spokesperson for the settlers in Hebron. So it's a wide group of people that I wanted you to have some comment about. And maybe the best way for our audience to get into this is because so many of us don't quite understand the history, particularly of Hamas, let's say, and the relationship it might have to the idea of Zionism.
Yeah.
Yeah, that history, brief history.
Sure. Very brief history. Yeah.
Okay.
So actually, Hamas was founded at the late 80s in Gaza as a branch of the Muslim Brotherhood, which was founded in Egypt during the 20s of the last century, of course. The Muslim Brotherhood aimed for an Islamic state, generally speaking, they were trying to educate people into Islamic studies, to deal with charities, etc. They objected the idea of pan-Arabism, which means national unity among the Arabs, and they prefer to have it in a much more religious way. At the beginning, when Hamas was founded in Gaza, Israel actually I wouldn't say support, but even encourage the Hamas, because Israel thought that if they are religious, they will not be involved in the nationalistic struggle between Israel and the PLO. But shortly afterward, Israel discovered that it's not the case, that the Hamas merged the national interest of the Palestinians with an Islamic approach. And actually, since the beginning of the 90s, since the Oslo Accord, which was signed on September 93, when Israel and the PLO tried to make peace and to have reconciliation, Hamas objected this process. And since 94, they started with suicidal attacks against Israel.
They carried on the armed struggle, whereas right at that point, PLO had more or less given that up for diplomacy, but Hamas continued with that strategy.
Exactly, and it is important to recognize it, because there are a lot of people thinking that the Hamas was just kept silence for a lot of years until they decided to make this horrific attack on October 7th. But in reality, Hamas, since the beginning, since the inception of the peace process between Israel and the PLO, was on the side of those who objected any kind of compromise with Israel. Their aim is to have an Islamic Palestinian state from the river to the sea.
Right. That's the slogan we hear among the supporters these days, particularly on the left and on campus. Now, you taught at Columbia. You were at Columbia, now in Israel, obviously, but you were on campus at a time when the demonstrations were taking place, the protests, groups like Jewish Voice for Peace and Students for Justice in Palestine were banned. It took a while for that to happen. What are your feelings? What as a professor there, what was going on campus as you saw it, and the banning of these groups? Are you for that? And what is it that they're not getting on the left there in terms of their analysis, in your opinion? Let's take Jewish Voice for Peace, for example. They're an anti-Zionist group, right?
Yes. So it's a very good and a profound question, because as you said, I taught at Columbia and NYU last year, but 2 weeks ago, I was invited to give a talk at Columbia University, and I had let's call it the opportunity to experience the demonstration at the campus. And honestly, I was shocked, because first of all, I think when they're chanting from the river to the sea, it's they don't know that this is a part of the Hamas platform. And when you chant from the river to the sea, obviously, I want that everyone from the river to the sea will have freedom and equality. But the idea of from the river to the sea is to have a Palestinian state without letting the Jews the right for self-determination. And I also felt that the demonstration was not in favor of peace, because they didn't say something like, from the river to the sea, Palestine and Israelis will be free. Yeah, they omit the issue of the Jews. And I also think that I felt, in a way, that it was not only demonstrations, it was also some kind of celebration. because if you think about it, and I am in favor of two-state solution, and I'm in favor of peace, and I can be very critical of the Israeli government. But if you want peace, yeah, you cannot support the Hamas. To support the Hamas is actually to be against the Palestinians' interest. Yeah, if we want to free the Gazans, we need to free them from the Hamas, not only from Israel. Yeah, so I expected that 1, 2, 3, 4 days after the massacre, it was the right time, even for those who are very critical of Israel, at least to identify with the pain that the Israelis suffer. And the fact that this is the right time in which this was exactly the beginning of the protest gave me the feeling that they are celebrating what they think was the defeat of Israel on October 7th, and not only asking for peace.
And of course, many of the members of Jewish Voice for Peace are Jewish. So
Yeah.
that, do you want to delve into that?
Yes, sure.
What do you think about that?
Sure. First of all, I like to look in all cases about the complexity of the situation. So I think that even though this organization is a Jewish organization, yeah, they are on the margin. And in fact, I think that the idea of Am Israel, the people of Israel, was not alive as it alive nowadays. I mean, 99% of the Jews all over the world are very much united in the grief and in the pain and in the need of Israel to retaliate.
Mm-hmm.
So we are talking about a small, very small minority among the Jews. I assume that they have good intention of tikkun olam, repairing the world, but they are suffering from ignorance because first and foremost, how come they didn't ask to release the hostages? How come their first step or their first thinking was a ceasefire and not releasing the hostages?
Right.
And moreover, they are asking for ceasefire, and me, as someone who lives in the Middle East, obviously I want to see ceasefire. I want to go back to normal, and I don't want to see the Gazans suffering, and I don't want to see Israelis suffering. But if you are talking about ceasefire immediately, it means letting the Hamas remain
in
the ruling power of Gaza.
Yeah.
So they need to to go deeper into what they are saying in order to understand what they are saying.
And Avi, help us, our audience, also to understand the failed peace processes that have occurred in the 90s and so on. People wonder why, what happened there? Why have the extremists taken over and resorted to the sort of violence and barbarity that they've resorted to? Is that partly because of the failed peace process? And tell us why that never happened. Why wasn't a just and fair peace ever really concluded?
Yes, so it's like a question for a whole book, yeah.
Absolutely.
But if I will try to be concise, the crux of the matter is that the land of Israel or Palestine was originally the land of the Jews, yeah, in the biblical time. But the Jews were absent of the land for almost 2,000 years. There was Jewish settlements in the land of Israel since there, but very small minority. When Zionism erupted and the Jews wanted to go back to their homeland, historical homeland, they faced a problem. The Arabs were here and they said, this is our land. So this is, in a very, very simplistic way, the crux of the conflict. Now, there were many initiatives to solve the conflict. The main idea which was relevant, which was appeared on the political arena in 1937, was to have a two-state solution. But the Palestinians back then rejected the idea. They said it's like someone will come into your house, will stay there, and after a while he will say, let's divide your house. This was their logic. So they were against the idea of two-state solution at 36. And also on 47, when the UN resolution decided to go for two-state solution. During the 90s, there was a short period of optimism in which the Israelis and the Palestinians, led by Yasser Arafat and the PLO, agreed on the idea of two-state solution. But because of disputes around the issue of if Jerusalem should be the capital of Israel or the Palestinian state, whether the Palestinian refugees should be absorbed in Israel or not.
That's the law of return, correct? That's the law of return.
Yeah, the law of
so there
return.
was always this issue of how many Palestinians could return to their homeland. Because tell us again, like 48, 47,
because
displaced, great numbers were displaced, and was it like 150,000 remained within Israel's borders and became citizens, right? But many were displaced, and many, of course, went to Jordan and Gaza. So there's always this feeling of wanting to go back to. So that was always a stumbling block. And also, as you say, the acceptance at some gut level that Jews had a presence there and we could do compromises, but there's no compromise when it comes to that fact that Jews have a place there and they're not going anywhere. So we can talk about divvying up the land and so on. So, but to be fair about this, there are extremists on the Jewish side, right? The Israeli side, who So we have that. Throw that into the mix, right?
Yeah, I totally agree with you. There are extremists among the Jews and among the Palestinians alike. This is for sure. But still, we need to take into account that a massacre like the massacre which was done by Hamas on October 7th was never done by a Jew or an Israeli. Something like that was it is unacceptable even among the most extremist Jewish in Israel. But I want to take us to the issue of Gaza. We were very close, the Israeli and the Palestinian, to reach a peace agreement on the basis of two-state solution. And as I said, because of disagreement around Jerusalem, about the law of return, about how big will be the Palestinian states, etc., the peace process did not materialize into a peace agreement. Now, on 2005, Israel decided that if we cannot have a peace agreement with the Palestinians, at least let's disengage from Gaza. Israel pull out completely from Gaza, and moreover, Israel uprooted by force the Jewish settlements around Gaza, because the Palestinians there said that they cannot live with Jewish settlements in their territory. And the Israelis, led by Arik Sharon, was very hawkish, said, let's see what will happen. So in the first 2 years, between 2005 to 2007, it looked like that the Gazans are really trying to prosper their land, and it could be a heaven in Gaza. And Gaza was ruled by the PLO at the beginning when Israel pulled out. But a year afterward, there was an election in Gaza in the Palestinian Authority. Hamas won over the PLO. The PLO refused to accept the result of the election. And then the Hamas decided to topple, to make a coup against the PLO, they killed many of their officers, and they took Gaza by force. So since they took Gaza by force in 2007, Israel was afraid that Hamas, while it's declaring explicitly that our aim is one Palestinian state all over the land, will smuggle weaponry. So Israel put them under blockade. But once Israel put Gaza under blockade, the Hamas said, we are going to make more military effort against you in order to lift the blockade.
Right.
It sounds very reasonable.
Yeah.
But if they are smuggling weaponry with the blockade, how can we lift the blockade if they are doing it anyway?
Yeah.
So it's a very, very complicated situation.
It is, and the feuds between the two groups as well. And Palestinians often use it sort of this scapegoat too, for a variety of other reasons, with other Arab countries and so on. But let me, how does this fit into the Intifada, the two Intifadas? And the second was quite different than the first, right? When you talk about suicidal emissions and so on. So this violence has been escalating for a while now, and so bring that into our understanding here.
Yeah, so I would differentiate between the two intifadas. The first, which was done between 1987 to 1991, something like that, was a real Palestinian rebellion against the Israeli occupation. Most of the Palestinians back then used stones and not lethal weaponry.
Right.
And the result of the first Intifada was the beginning of the peace process between Israel and the PLO. I think that the first Intifada showed to many Israelis, like Yitzhak Rabin and Shimon Peres and citizens like me, that the Palestinians have a just cause. They just want to have their own state. It's not another initiative to terrorize Israel. That they had their just cause, and the result was, as I said, the beginning of the peace process. This is the first Intifada.
Right.
The second Intifada is something totally different, because the second Intifada erupted immediately after the collapse of the peace talk between Israel and the PLO during Camp David 2000. There was a summit in Camp David between Ehud Barak and Yasser Arafat in order to conclude the final agreement between Israel and the Palestinians.
Right.
Once they didn't reach an agreement, the Palestinians started a very, very violent intifada, which included Hamas suicide bombers and suicide attacks and PLO terror attacks. And in the eyes of the Israelis, it was like a sign of betray, because if we are on the diplomatic track, even if we failed, we shouldn't go immediately into the terror track.
Right.
In the eyes of the Palestinians, once the peace process failed, we, Israel, deceived them because they expected to have their own state. So they had no choice but to act with violence. But the second Intifada, even though Israel, after a while, succeeded to quell it, was a focal point in the history of the peace process, because since the second Intifada, there is actually no peace process between the Israelis and the Palestinians, and this also helped the Hamas to get stronger, because when you don't have a peace process,
right,
obviously it's easier to the extremists to gain more power.
So could have Israel done anything differently, in your opinion? I mean, it's historically, or would more progress have been made had not Rabin been assassinated?
I think that the assassination of Rabin was, in history, there is always the question of who makes history, the leader or the dynamic of events. But I think that in the case of Yitzhak Rabin, the fact that he was assassinated was crucial for the failure of the peace process because, think about it, Rabin was the chief of staff when Israel conquered the West Bank and Gaza on 67.
Right.
So when someone like him, a general, a former general, is telling the Israeli, this is the time for peace, he had a lot of influence, not only, by the way, on the Israelis, also on the Palestinians. They also respected Rabin very much.
Right.
And unfortunately, Rabin was assassinated by a Jewish extremist.
I was going to bring that up. Yeah, absolutely. And of course, one could make the argument, as I'm sure you have already, also that part of this event with Hamas was also meant to make sure that there wasn't any sort of peace with Saudi Arabia and Israel and some of the other Arab countries, right? So that was another way of feeling that the peace was on the way, and this is another way of making sure that doesn't happen, because again, you weren't going to get the ultimate goal that you want, the river to the sea, one state. Correct on that too?
So
the larger geopolitical issues become part of the debate and discussion. And as you well know, this is a war that's being fought in the sense of in the media, and how people look, and the the impact that people are going to have around the world, seeing the Israelis, go into hospitals and what was it now, 12, 13,000 people, half of them civilians, being killed. So that's being played on as well. So how does one, what I also want to bring out too is particularly the American left, and the argument, as many make, and Khalidi has made also, of Israel as this colonial power. How would you answer that, and the identification by so many on the left with the Palestinians as this oppressed group, and relating it even to Black Lives Matter? So you have this conflated into political rhetoric that gets so very confusing. So which comes out with the analysis by Chomsky and Finkelstein as well, both Jews. So that's a lot I threw at you there, but help us understand.
A lot of Jews and a lot of questions. I would say this. First of all, with respect to the first part of your question, it shows us how problematic it is to support the Hamas, because at the beginning we said that Hamas conducted terror attack because of the peace process, because they objected the peace process. At the end, we said the Hamas engaged with terror attacks because there is no peace process, which means Hamas is always engaging in terror attacks, even if you are going in the direction of peace with the Palestinians, because then they are objecting it. And when you don't have peace with the Palestinians, they are saying we are doing it because you don't have a peace process. So I think that we, Jews, Israelis, Palestinians, non-Jews, non-Palestinian, we should all be united against Hamas. This is for the first part. For your question, I think that to describe Zionism as a pure colonialistic project, it's an historically mistake. Because first of all, if you're thinking about settler colonialism, the best example is Australia, or even the United States, the biggest democracies around the world. Secondly, the Zionism was a unique phenomenon which includes some colonialistic aspects, as it used to be at that time. I mean, being supported by the British, coming from Europe to the East.
Right.
But having said that, Zionism was also a very anti-colonialistic project because we fought the British for independence, because we came back to our historical homeland. There is no dispute about it. And moreover, the vast majority of the Israelis today are from the Middle East, like my parents who came from Iraq.
Iraq.
So how can you say that we are the colonialists while, historically speaking, before the 19th century, before the late 19th century, there was not such a thing like a Palestinian people. I'm not saying that today there is no such a thing like Palestinian people, and it doesn't matter when they were established, because everyone needs to start from somewhere. But if you're terming Zionism as a colonialistic movement, it's just wrong. And moreover, when I visited Colombia, you are absolutely correct. They are merging Zionism with anti-black movement and with Donald Trump and all the bad things around the world. But again, it's historically it's wrong, because the Jews tried to help the blacks in America in many aspects. The Jews themselves were termed the blacks of Europe. Up until after the Holocaust. So to address Israel as the most problematic colonialistic project is so wrong. And moreover, yes, Israel is a strong, sophisticated, thriving state. But still, we are living in the Middle East, surrounded by enemies like no other state in the world. So you cannot portray Israel as a Goliath. Okay, you shouldn't portray Israel only as David, but at least a combination of Goliath and David, just like the Palestinians are.
Right. So, in terms of the war here, getting down to very practical aspects, if we follow what you've just said here, that Hamas just simply cannot go on, how do you think the Israelis, the IDF, how can you possibly eradicate the leadership without an unbelievable bloodbath of civilians?
Yeah. So first of all, this is a huge problem, because we don't want to harm innocent civilians in Gaza. I think that the fact that Israel, entered the Shifa hospital with incubators, it's something very unique to any army in the world. But the problem is that the Hamas is hiding among Palestinian population, and this is why many of them getting hurt. And we need to try, and I know that the IDF is trying to avoid it. And I think if we want to avoid it, the best way is if the international community together, with the Arab states, will join forces with Israel against Hamas, which means telling Hamas, listen, you are not going to rule Gaza. And if the international community can send international forces after this war to Gaza, we can eliminate Hamas, not as an idea. A lot of people saying you cannot eliminate Hamas because you cannot eliminate idea. This is correct. But you can take from those people who believed in the Hamas agenda the weapon. And this is what Israel is trying to do. So in order to protect as much as you can the population in Gaza, Israel called the Gazan to move from the north to the south and to clean the north. And now, I'm not a general, maybe we should call them to move from the north, from the south to another place. It's a complicated issue. I'm not saying that this is that I have an easy answer how to do it without harming the miserable population in Gaza. It's heartbreaking as well.
Absolutely. You know what I want to do in the remaining time, because you're beginning to touch on a new narrative that has to develop here. And the old nationalism, including Zionism, and I wanted to get also into some of the psychology that you're dealing with. These are very traumatized peoples here. And again, I understand that very, very well, that what so many Israelis are now thinking about is reflecting on the history of pogroms and the Holocaust again. This goes very, very deep, and psychologically it's very damaging. But and also on the Palestinian side too, their own traumas, the catastrophe, the Nakba. So what I'd like to do now is have about 4 or 5 minutes of an incredible testimonial by a 19-year-old Israeli from the kibbutz that was attacked. I think she was only 4 or 5 miles from Gaza, and she speaks in such an incredibly powerful, articulate way about the need for peace. Still, even after what happened, and again, I mentioned my opening, Vivian Silver, and that. So I'd like all of us in the audience here to watch about 4 or 5 minutes of this, and then have you comment about the Peace Now movement and what the left still can do, perhaps, within the Israeli political sphere to bring about a better and more just peace. So we're going to put on about, again, as I say, 4 or 5 minutes of this incredible testimonial by this 19-year-old that was about a month ago. This was put out, and this was about 4 or 5 days after the attack, which again, she survived. So let's put that on.
אני בת 19, מקיבוץ בארי. הדבר הכי גרוע, חוץ מלשמוע את כל השמות של המתים והנעדרים והשבויים, הדבר הכי גרוע במיידי לא היה לשכב בחושך בממד, זה לא היה לשמוע את היריות, זה לא היה אפילו בזמן אמיתי לקבל התראות מחברי קיבוץ שלי, שמות שהכרתי מאז שאני מכירה את עצמי, מבקשים לעזרה ואף אחד לא בא. הדבר הכי גרוע בשבילי, חוץ מהמתים והשבויים והחטופים, זה הרגע שבו יצאתי מהבית כשפינו אותנו והיה חושך והייתי יחפה ודרכתי על זכוכית וראיתי את הפנים של אנשים מהשכונה שלי. פחד. פחד אלוהים. וראיתי פנים שהכרתי מאז שאני זוכרת את עצמי. כמו שאף פעם לא ראיתי אותם, דמעות. מה שקרה לנו היה מזעזע. אבל יש משהו שמאוד חשוב לי להגיד. מה שקרה לנו לא היה חדש, פשוט גרוע יותר. מפקירים אותנו שנים. אל תגידו כיפת ברזל, זה פלסטר. אל תגידו חיילים, זה פלסטר. זה פלסטר, בן אדם גוסס, אתם מביאים לו פלסטר. בושה. ושנים אנחנו מדברים על זה. שנים. מפקירים אותנו. לכאן זה מגיע. זה לא היה חדש, רק גרוע יותר. וזה לא הדבר היחיד שהוא לא חדש, אלא רק גרוע יותר במלחמה הזאת. ואני מנסה למצוא את המילים, כי בכנות קצת קשה למצוא אותן עם כל הכעס והאבל שיש בתוכי כרגע. איך אני אמורה לקום בבוקר, אזרחי ישראל, פוליטיקאים, תושבי ישראל, חול, לא אכפת לי מי שומע, תקשיבו לי טוב. איך אני אמורה לקום בבוקר ולדעת ש4.5 קילומטרים מקיבוץ בארי, בעזה, יש אנשים שזה לא נגמר בשבילם. בשבילי זה נגמר אחרי 12 שעות, כי היה לאן להוציא אותי. אני בים המלח. מי שמדבר על נקמה, תתביישו. יש הרבה כאב, זה נכון. אני, אחרי כל מה שעברתי, כל כך הרבה כוחות אני מאבדת בכל פעם שאני שומעת את המילה נקמה. מה שאני עברתי, שאנשים יעברו את זה ולא יהיה מי שיוציא אותם. אי אפשר ככה. אל תגידו לי חיילים, אל תגידו לי הגנה, תגידו לי פתרון מדיני. כבר שנים אנחנו מבקשים פתרון מדיני. אני בת 19. יש לי חברים שנפלו בקרב כחיילים בימים האחרונים, שכשהם היו בגן הם ידעו מה הם רוצים להיות בצבא. שאני אגדל ככה את הילדים שלי? בושה! בושה וחרפה. שאני אגדל את הילדים שלי ואני אשאל אותם כשהם בני 5, תגיד חמודי מה אתה רוצה להיות בצבא? כמה אפשר? כמה אפשר לאבד? כמה אפשר לספוג? אנחנו, מי שיצא, אנחנו הוכחה חיה ומהלכת. ותאמינו לי, מי ששומע את זה, שאנחנו, זה עוד יכול להיות יותר גרוע. זה יכול להיות. ההחלטה להפציץ בטילים, זה מעל הראש שלי. ביבי, חמאס, לא אכפת לי. מה שאני יודעת זה שבארי סובלת, נחל עוז סובלת, כפר עזה, שדרות ועזה. תאמינו לי שכל קסם 4.5 קילומטר מרחק, האדמה בבארי ובעזה רועדת בדיוק אותו דבר. בדיוק אותו דבר. אי אפשר, אי אפשר. עכשיו, אני יודעת שיש הרבה כעס על ביבי, כי אני מרגישה אותו. אני מרגישה אותו חזק מאוד, ברגעים שאני מצליחה להרגיש, כי בזמן האחרון זה קצת קשה. אני מרגישה אותו, כי כמה אנשים צריכים למות בשבילו? כמה אנשים צריכים למות בשביל האגו, בשביל האינטרסים? עכשיו, זה נכון שביבי ובאמת שאני מאשימה אותו ב100%, בהכל. זה נכון. הוא בחר לתת לנו לחיות ככה. הוא בחר לתת לנו כיפת ברזל במקום פתרון מדיני. והוא בחר גם עוד הרבה דברים אחרים. והדם שלנו על הידיים שלו. אבל זה לא רק הוא. הוא שורש של בעיה עמוקה מאוד, אבל זה לא רק הוא. אם המילים שלי מגיעות למישהו, תסתכלו טוב טוב פנימה, עמוק פנימה. תשאלו את עצמכם מה הערכים שלכם, תשאלו את עצמכם סביב כל מה שאתם רואים, איך הערכים שאתם יודעים שיש לכם נוגעים למה שאתם רואים. תשאלו את עצמכם טוב טוב, תשאלו את עצמכם למי אתם מצביעים, תשאלו את עצמכם מה אתם מבקשים ממנו. אני יודעת מה אני מבקשת. אני מבקשת שלום הוגן. אני מבקשת שהבדואים בנגב יקבלו עזרה כמו שקיבוץ בארי קיבל עזרה.
Have you seen that clip before? Is this the first?
No, it's my first time.
First time. Now it's about 9 minutes long, and I so that's about 4 or 5 minutes of it. But
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
you're under the Golden Dome there, right?
Yeah. First.
All right, go ahead.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable.
First of all, she's brave, amazing, beautiful, unique, rightful, and I agree that Bibi is absolutely not the right leader for Israel, to put it mildly, and I'm sure, by the way, that once this war will be over, he will be replaced, either by his own will or by huge demonstrations in Israel. And I cannot, argue with her and their suffering, but I wouldn't put, even though I'm not one of Bibi's fans, I wouldn't put all of the blame in this case on Bibi, obviously, Again, we need to remember that Israel pulled out of Gaza by the leader of Bibi's party back then, Arik Sharon. And when Israel pulled out of Gaza, Hamas says, we don't want to see the settlements near us. So we uprooted the settlements, and we didn't think that the kibbutzim, which are located within the green light, within Israel, with no dispute, will be murdered eventually by the Hamas. So yes, I want a political solution. I'm all in favor of political solution. I think that she's correct to claim that only peace will guarantee security. But I think that, you cannot put all the blame on Bibi's shoulder at this case. It's the Hamas. And in order to have a political solution, again, we said it many times, but this is maybe the most important conclusion right now, is that we need to take off the military power from Hamas and try to alleviate the citizens of Gaza, and to remember that just like power corrupts, passivity also corrupts, and the Palestinians should take responsibility on themselves, just like we, the Jews or the Israelis, should take, like she said, more responsibility on ourselves to promote peace. I still believe in peace. I still think that the two-state solution is the best way to live in some kind of a confederation between Israel and the Palestinian state. But again, we need to distinguish between our shared quest for peace and the need not to take revenge. I don't think that I heard a lot of Israelis are talking about revenge, because nothing will bring the 1,400 people who were murdered, and I hope the hostages will be back, but I cannot even think about what they are going on right now in Gaza, in the tunnel of Gaza. But so it's not about revenge, it's about a duty to eliminate evil. And I think that we should do anything that we can in the constraints of morality and protecting the civil population in order to defeat Hamas, and then to think much harder about how to achieve peace, because at the bottom line, she is very much correct. Only peace between the people will give us security as well.
And that would include deep soul searching within the Israeli soul and political, cultural structure too, right? What is it that we need to do here to bring a fair, more just Israel, but getting to the point where you begin to follow some of the prophetic Jewish traditions, be kind to the stranger. I mean, that's what we're taught over and over again, more than any other, because you are a stranger in a strange land. So I know this is it's a hard thing to put your head around, but it is about a radical love. It's about a revolutionary love. It's truth and reconciliation, and it's hard, and there's got to be more compromise. And in just a couple of minutes we have here, this could be an opportunity for this new narrative and getting out of our narrow, hateful silos and fears with the right leadership. We had that opportunity in our own country after 9/11. We totally blew it. All right. And so we understand that the Israelis very much think of this as their 9/11, but can't make the same mistakes we did. So last question here in the last couple of minutes. What would you like to see American Jews, particularly younger American Jews, what would you like to hear from them and say, what would you like to see them do on campus and help bring about this world of peace?
Yeah. So first of all, I would expect the American Jews right now to support Israel. All over the world there are huge demonstrations against Israel. There is a rise of anti-Semitism, and I expect the Jews all over the world to be united.
Okay.
I also expect the American Jews to be more engaged in Israeli affairs, to help to promote peace. I think that once the war will be over, there will be a need for new kind of politicians A lot of Israelis, even me included, who are doing something else, starting to think that we should be more involved in the public affair in order to take us to a different track. And I think that this idea of radical love is the best idea. And, you know, we are at the lowest point of our life right now in Gaza and in Israel. And maybe this is the right time to bring on a new kind of leadership, which should be, you know, on the one hand, strong and understand the complexity of the Jewish existence in the Middle East, but on the other hand, to bring this idea of radical love. And I think that this girl, even though she is one of the most impressive girls that I've ever saw, she's not unique in terms of there are a lot of Israelis who are still believe in peace even after this massacre. And I don't think that you could have watched this phenomenon in other states, that people who were on, yeah.
Absolutely. I hear, is that from you or, I think we've reached the end of the show here. So I hear,
me.
Is that for you? Okay,
No,
hopefully you don't have to go to the show. But I agree with everything you're saying, and let's hope for the ceasefire brings the hostages back, as many as possible, and continue that process. Thank you so very, very much, Avi, for being with us today.
Thank you, Jim.
I hope to see you again soon in New York when you come, all right? Let me know.
For sure. And you are doing an important job in bringing other voices.
Thank you. So are you. Thank you so very, very much. And thank you so very, very much for being with us this week on The Radical Imagination. Thank you again very much.